Marshall, who will talk on the topic, Historical Cemeteries and Burial Practices on San Salvador, an Archaeological Study. Welcome to our presenters.
Thank you so much, everybody. I guess we get to be the warm-up act for some really good-looking homemade treats, so we'll keep that in mind. I have been a member of the Bahamas Historical Society for many years, but this is the first time that my schedule, although I come to the Bahamas at least twice a year and spend some time in Nassau in transit to San Salvador, this is the first time I've ever been able to come to a meeting. So I'm very pleased that my first meeting is one where I get to present to you. And I'm also very pleased that history will show that I got to speak in the Society's Jubilee year. So congratulations to everybody on a 50th anniversary, and I'm glad that this talk can be a part of that year. The talk that I'm going to give tonight, Michael and I are going to switch off a little bit, was made possible, as you probably know, I do a lot of my work at excavating plantations on San Salvador, but when there I became very interested in cemeteries, and that's a wonderful part of historical archaeology, is you can look at documents, you can look at landscape, you can excavate things, and they all sort of fit. Everybody sort of says, yeah, you can do that. That's part of what you're allowed to do as a historical archaeologist. So it's a good deal. So I got interested in the cemeteries and collected a lot of information that we'll share with you tonight. And Michael came into the project actually having never been to the Bahamas. He came last summer and got to see all this stuff after he had done all the hard work through a competitive graduate research grant. So that's how this tag team you're going to see tonight got put together. So I'm going to get started for you, and the very first thing, Mike, if you want to hit the first slide for me, and we'll have to work this out, is I wanted to sort of, I put archaeological in quotes because I didn't want anybody to think that we had gone digging up the cemeteries of San Salvador, because we in fact did no such thing. While people have done excavations of cemeteries on other islands in the Caribbean, and in fact there is some plans in the works for some archaeological work on cemeteries, not by us but by Grace Turner, on some of the cemeteries here in Nassau. That's not the type of work we're doing. But what I wanted to sort of introduce to you is the idea of what an archaeological analysis was. Because most people go to cemeteries, they're not unfamiliar places, and most of you probably can tell me stories about Bahamian cemeteries and things that you know based on your own experience. But an archaeological analysis is going to be a little bit different than sort of that occasional visit or sort of a lifetime of visits to different historic sites. So I wanted to just sort of let you know sort of how thinking about cemeteries archaeologically can be done as a way of bringing us into this topic. So Mike, if I could have the next slide, please. Okay. So archaeologists, no matter where they work and when they work, so both prehistorically, early history, all of these types of things, burials, as I'm sure you well know, is a very common form of archaeological evidence. And the reason that archaeologists are so interested in burials is that they're tied to rituals, that burials are rituals of commemoration and interment, and they reflect religious and social traditions at the time and place in which they're taking part. And it means that, unlike a lot of archaeological sites that are excavated that tend to be domestic, focusing on houses and sort of daily life, burials are a different sort of information that can tell us a lot about social networks in the past, whether that be ethnicity, whether that be gender, whether it be issues of race, family, all of these types of things, and also sort of social practices, and also beliefs people feel connected to other people in the world, and also to the afterlife. So burials and rituals have long been archaeological fodder, and so this is sort of, this analysis is in that tradition. Okay. The other thing that makes an archaeological analysis different is that archaeologists look for patterns. So we're interested in how things were done repeatedly during the past. And we can look at how things were done typically and how people chose to deviate from typical patterns of behavior. And we use that to learn about different groups of people. And so by looking for patterns, we can look for differences in space. So how do people do different things, do the same types of things in one place versus another, and also over time. And so this graph that I show you, when I show this to my students, I always say, if I didn't show you this in an introduction to archaeology class, I would somehow lose my license to practice, although you don't get one. But you would lose your license to practice. This is a very famous study done on headstones in New England in the 1970s by an archaeologist named Jim Dietz. And this is a perfect example of archaeologists using patterns. And I'm gonna step away from the microphone. I hope that everybody can still hear me. But what he did is he went to a series of cemeteries in New England and he recorded the dominant iconography, so how the headstones were decorated in all of these different cemeteries. And he noticed that there were these three main types. There was a death's head, a skull with wings, there was an angel, a cherub, and then eventually you had an urn and willow. And what he did by comparing the presence of these to the dates on the stone, what you can see is the wider the band, the more popular the design. Okay, so what he's showing you is in 1720, death heads are very popular, and they're falling out of favor by 1780. You can then see the introduction of the cherub that becomes very popular and dwindles again by 1810. They don't show up anymore. And here we can see a real popularity surge in the urn and willow design. Dietz was able to show that if you connected these dates and these designs to major religious and social movements, there were some pretty clear trends. This relationship was to the first Protestant Reformation that allowed you to think about whether or not you could go to heaven. So this focused on the mortal remains. This focused on your eternal reward. It's a major shift in religious thought. And the urn and willow is a Greek revival design that was also mirrored in architecture in the United States. If you notice when this becomes popular, it's not long after the American Revolution. And Americans are forming a democratic society, and they turn to the Greeks for a lot of the images and architecture that they want to consider important to define a new nation. And it's interesting, right, that a headstone can sort of speak to those types of things. So these types of patterns are the way that archaeologists like to look at all types of things, not just headstones. Go ahead. There are also two types of ways that archaeologists study most archaeological sites of any kind. The first of which are the study of landscapes, which includes the natural environment. So why did people choose to build a site in relationship to the natural resources of an area? The second can also be, why do people choose to arrange things the way that they do? How do the way that people shape the world around them through buildings and architecture and even empty spaces tell you something about their ideas of social structure, about belief systems, and also about the environment? And so I just put up here a very grand example. This is the city of Teotihuacan in northern Mexico, which is a very famous site. This is taken from the Temple of the Sun. You're looking across the plaza to the Temple of the Moon. But this is the perfect example of how people are choosing to arrange their space in ways that are culturally meaningful. So anytime archaeologists look at a site of any type, the idea of landscape is really important. The other thing that archaeologists, of course, are well known for studying are material objects or artifacts. And so anytime archaeologists go into a space, they look for the material things. And one of the ways that I like to very quickly explain the way archaeologists think about material objects is to every object, even in